The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. L.P. Hartley's opening line for The Go-Between is certainly true of Paddy McAndrew's series of cinematic vignettes of life at Downside in the 1970s, followed by his film of reunions with Father Gervais telling some wonderful stories, a natural offshoot of a school that seemed to grow stories organically. One of the images in a film of the Cavril Fair might be taken as emblematic. Open windows in the quad, with half the school hanging out of them. Paddy's film is a series of vivid glimpses of a time that has disappeared as surely as the Edwardian summer of Hartley's novel. Paddy is not presenting these CCF parades, summer fetes, prize givings as a comprehensive picture, but hoping they serve to evoke the remarkable place Downside then was. He asked me to add an introduction. My first sight of Downside was of a place that wasn't like a school at all. When I came for interview in 1974, boys were climbing in and out of the window next to a completely untroubled Father Woolston. It was my first glimpse of the homely, familial atmosphere that then characterized Downside. After a year or so, I was asked to help Father Clement as housemaster of Roberts, and I was surprised to be told that as a token of this honour, I would be given a milk saucepan and hot plate. It was only a short time before I realized that the secret powerhouse, the spinning hub of the boarding houses, was the evening cocoa party for prefects and the rest of the house in groups. Sitting round the simmering or sometimes boiling over milk, I got to know the Roberts boys as old friends. I am sure it was the same for every housemaster. When I was sixth form master, I borrowed the idea of outside lectures on Saturday morning, which were then becoming fashionable. We had many memorable speakers, like Lord Hailsham and Lord Longford, but even these, Downside's informal atmosphere managed to modify. I remember one speaker who, in a darkened theatre, had his slides not only in a random order, but some of them upside down, so that when he finished and we turned on the lights, there were only a few boys left. Another lecture on the Loch Ness Monster to the whole school was delivered by a squadron leader who was still using Second World War RAF slang. He followed every statement with an unusual "ha!" The packed theatre quickly picked this up and joined in. Discipline was a concept occasionally invoked, but never, in my recollection, enacted successfully. Though on the day after Father Philip was appointed headmaster, with the specific brief of restoring discipline, an armoured car appeared outside the old house. It turned out to be just an OG in the Royal Hussars, coincidentally dropping in. On one notorious occasion, a group of 4 boys came back from a week's suspension at Worth, only to return immediately to their taste for scrumpy in Chilcompton. Made reckless by rough cider, they threw a large rock through the bedroom window of the head of physics, Peter Webber. His telephone call to the school reached Father Gervais, who knew exactly who the boys were and was waiting for them as they entered the Ullathorne corridor. Their expulsion followed the next day, but by the time they left, the whole school was hanging out of the windows in the quad as the taxi driver had been told not to take anyone till he had a chit from a monk housemaster. Unfortunately, it was the time for Vespers, and no monk could be found. This was perhaps an unusual incident. More regular were the school films, then on a Sunday afternoon. The housemaster on duty was expected to supervise these, but the carbon projector could fail. I remember the James Bond film From Russia with Love, when two gypsy girls were preparing to fight and taking off their outer garments when the carbon bulb failed and a roar of frustration from 580 boys arose. On another occasion, the reels of Othello, where plot is rather important, were shown in the wrong order, completely ruining the sequence. And on another, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, when Chief Bromden, the Native American, lifted up the wash basin and hurled it through the window. The school completely identified with his attitude and rose to its feet in a spontaneous cheer. All these incidents bound the school together in a rich weave of friendship and camaraderie. Of course, real intellectual learning was going on, helped by the fact that Downside had some monks of formidable intellect. One could go into coffee and Father Hilary, a student of F.R. Leavis, would hand back to Father Iltit a copy of the latest Iris Murdoch. Father Iltit himself was writing books on theology on subjects like certainty and publishing follow-up articles in the Downside Review, Second Thoughts about Certainty. Father Joseph Coombe Tennant, a war hero and no mean philosopher himself, is reported to have quipped, "Not so certain now." Then there was Father Dolly, his Irish Guard's nickname, but really Abbot Rudison Brooks, with an MC from each of the two wars, whose autobiography had been ghostwritten by Anthony Wheatley, but whose memory was sadly vanishing. When Father Dolly heard Wheatley read the first chapter to him, the story goes that he said, "By Jove, that chap had an interesting life. Who did you say he was?" In one of the reunion films, Father Gervais tells a story of one of many encounters with the emergency services. I remember a fire breaking out in the Dorchester Tower in a room festooned with electric wires. The volunteer fire brigade from Radstock arrived, and the lead fireman in full breathing apparatus arrived at the top of the stairs only to find his hose stretched no further. "You don't have any fire extinguishers, do you?" he uttered through his breathing apparatus. "You are the fire brigade," I said. On another occasion, I remembered a flu epidemic that swept through the school, making the Gaskey look like a World War I hospital, when an ambulance appeared outside the old house. The auxiliary school nurse brought in for the crisis had herself succumbed to a serious dose of flu. One Saturday evening in Roberts, I heard a sudden frantic rushing about on the corridor. "What's going on?" I asked. "Some yobs at the Three Pins, sir. We're going to get them." I looked out of the window to see 17 yobs at the Three Pins, with pickaxe handles, bicycle chains, even knives. "You will stay where you are," I said, and rang Father Philip, who promised to meet me by the Three Pins. I set off across the green bank with the whole of Roberts watching, expecting to meet Father Philip. Each step that took me nearer the Three Pins confirmed the certainty that I might have to confront the yobs on my own. I could not now turn around. When I reached the mob, all fired up by insults heaped on them by Downside boys, all I could think of saying was, "If you don't disperse, I'll ring the police." I could hardly believe it when, to my surprise, they muttered a few imprecations and sloped off. At which point, Father Philip appeared. He had decided to change out of his habit first. As these films show, and Father Jervis's stories confirm, Downside could put on a good parade or enjoy a picnic, but never took itself too seriously. Warm and homely, the monks and a wonderful lay staff, some learned like Desmond Gregory, some very wise like Ronnie Woods, and several veterans of war service with the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, like Tony Price or Robin Stalybras, provided stability for the school, enabling every kind of boy to find somewhere to pursue his hobby. This could be building motorbikes or flying, as in Paddy's case, or model railways with Father Dennis, tea drinking with Father Cyprian, sculpture with Father Hubert, or philosophy in the 14 with Father Iltyd. Of course, there were big school occasions. The first 15, you can spot Simon Halliday, who played for England in one reel, against Sherborne, and the first 11 against the Wanderers, both playing on a pitch with a sensational view. Mass in the abbeys on Sundays or big feasts was always an occasion with sensational music presided over by the legendary Roger Bevan. There was a house play competition watched by fiercely partisan audiences. I remember the outrage caused by a Caverall play written by John Mullen, who's now a professor of literature at UCL. Paddy has worked hard to bring the sound and picture in these films to a high quality. It is worth the effort to give us a glimpse of this vanished world, and to remember the downside in the 1970s was home for its 580 boarders, a warm, amusing and nurturing atmosphere in which they could all grow and learn as individuals happily.
That was all for the people who didn't. No.
Look, you've got a halo. You're standing under a halo.
And what happened?
She liked to talking to other lights as bad boy. That's not very specific. What's the signature?
Throwing water, I think that was reasonable.
Yeah, throwing water.
Nuisance and dawn.
In the school office and say
Chic again.
Have you signed across the middle of the cost they've been done?
It must have been, yes. That's true, that's you, isn't it?
No, this was Paddy.
It was Paddy. He was headed out.
So for me, one of the greatest experiences of my life, actually.
It was one of ours.
And loved every minute of it, and I thank you all for your kindness to me, understanding, and actually my greatest joy will be your happiness and your success.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. I was quite sorry to have I'm the only housemaster who had the house shut down. Underneath. We're coming to stay with in your house tonight, not realizing that we're in the school. And so this crowd came across the fields through Mog Hill and down and into the school. And about 11:30 or so.
Oh, yes.
Space out, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a sec.
Yeah.
Fine.
In a second.
No, and they just eventually they made such a row coming in. They were all absolutely rolling drums. And then I got out of bed and put on my blue and white striped dressing gown,
The designer one.
and walked out of my room. And the Ramsey boys saw me, and they absolutely took fright. And in spite of the Hells Angels, ran down the Ramsey corridor. And the Hells Angels didn't know what it was, so they started running down the corridor. And they all ran down to some room at the end of Ramsey.
James Wands.
Yes, climbed out of the window and dropped out of the window.
I remember that.
Just because but I didn't know, if I knew they were Hells Angels, I would run thought it was just a Ramsey out.
Look, the first. That's funny, because Francis first got 3 quid and Joseph first got 11.
How much did Tom Randall have?
I'm looking, I'm waiting for
Do not.
My camera must
beer
have
on these. These are genuine.
Paul Knox. Come on, Paul. Look at that. 25 quid.
25 quid, bloody hell.
That's all right.
What are these?
Genuine pages of blue.
Having Bath. Who is Andrew's?
Kilroy, 1977. Gerard Kilroy?
Yes.
English?
Yeah.
Right. This is the delineation and description of Wednesday afternoon activities for which you were interviewed by Dougie.
Oh,
2 lemon posses.
Thank God.
I've taken glasses. No, you did.
I can only think of the time, another thing which is slightly off beam at the moment, but when Father Philip was going to get rid of the girls who were in the school, and the press got hold of it, and the television arrived, and they were in his office. He was just about to make a statement, and he got a piece of paper, and there was a knock on the door, and the village bobby arrived at the door. And Father Philip said, "Sorry, I'm very busy at the moment. We're just doing this thing on the television." And the body said, "It's all right, sir. I only came about the murder." And the cameras. apparently, Father Philip, we have in the monastery a large chest, and when men of the road come, gentlemen of the road, if they want, they get a meal and some money, and if they want any clothes, they take it out of this big chest. And Father Philip had thrown one of his pullovers into this, and this man had taken it off and gone up to the north of England and murdered his landlady. And it had Don Philip a film actress of the period of Bridget Bardot. Anyway, this boy was not doing very well at school, so I wrote to them and said, "Could you come down and discuss his future?" So she arrived by taxi. from Bath, and about sort of 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. And she's very nervous meeting me. A French lady, charming, absolutely delightful. She said, do you mind if I smoke? And I said, by all means do.
And you had a jet out?
No, and so she took out a cigarette, and I took out my very flame lighter, which boys have been mucking around. And I walked up to her and I turned this thing on, and a flame
Always the charmer. Always the charmer.
and it caught her eyelash.
Oh, like Michael Sodlow. Okay.
So she had to retire to my washroom upstairs. She was there for about an hour and a half, and she came back, sort of new eyelashes. And then she said, my taxi is late. She left, so he spent the rest of the career downside, sort of totally mucking up his life.
That's a sad story.
Memoirs.
All these stories, it's not what's in the story, it's the way you tell it.
That's a beautiful church, which was massively.
Well, serve yourself everything in the dining room here, and then come out and sit down and eat your meal outside. No crumbs, please.
He certainly was at
Sri Lanka?
He was at Sound.
Obviously, the year 1929 is very important in my life, otherwise we wouldn't be here this evening. In 1939, on the 3rd of September, those of you who were around at that time, you know that war broke out. It was absolutely marvellous for us children because the prep school that I was going to closed down. And we were let loose in Anglesey for months on end, going absolutely wild and falling into the sea, doing all sorts of exciting things. 1945, VE Day, Downside was allowed to escape from school and go to Wells, where we beat the whole town up. And they had a fun fair, and there were so many Downside boys present in the town that they were forced to open the fun fair. I got into a bumper car at 10:30 and got out of it at 1 o'clock. And the man asked me if I wanted to buy it. Yeah, I also cycled to Rome. It took me 3 weeks and a few days, and I've not been on a bicycle yet.